Welcome to True Crime Cases. Today, we are unveiling a shocking story in this episode. We explore a terrifying story of. This is the narrative of Julian, a murder and betrayal that takes place in April 2015 in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Rader was a prosperous real estate salesperson whose life was cruelly ended by the one he trusted the most. A 45-year-old resident of Fayetteville, Arkansas, Julian was a well-known. Julian Ray, a real estate representative for Ozark Realty, a nearby firm, was beaming. He possessed a degree and a gregarious demeanor that won him favor with his clients and coworkers. Graduated from the University of Arkansas with a degree in business administration and has been employed in the real estate industry for. Alora Julian and Julian Ray were married for more than 20 years, and it appeared like they were happy together. Julian Ray, Alora's second husband, had an 18-year-old stepdaughter called Amaya. Julian Ray, a psychology student in her first year at the University of Arkansas, got along well with. Outside of work, Julian Ray liked sailing and had a modest yacht, or so it appeared to the outside world. He frequently went out on Beaver Lake aboard a sailboat called Dreamcatcher, where he liked to spend weekends. His pals at the neighborhood marina recalled him as being on the sea, feeling the wind and the waves. Someone who, in the latter days of his life, was always ready to help and laugh. Julian Ray was working diligently to finalize a transaction on a substantial property deal. This transaction was crucial to his career since it involved commercial real estate in downtown Fayetteville. Additionally, he had reserved a cabin in the Ozark to prepare a surprise anniversary vacation for his sweetheart. Mountains and purchased Little Rock concert tickets. He even chose a unique jewelry from Sissy's Log Cabin, a nearby jewelry store, as a present for Julian's sweetheart in spite of his hectic schedule. Every morning, Ray found time to go to the neighborhood coffee shop and read our sagas. On April 10, he read the newspaper and spoke with the baristas. His favorite beverage was a caramel latte. 2015, 2 days prior to his passing, Julian Ray was spotted grinning and discussing his intentions at our sagas. For the weekend, he was content and enthusiastic about the future of Julian Ray, whose life appeared to be ideal on the outside, though there were unseen issues. His wife, his sweetheart, had been behaving anxious and agitated recently. She was wary of Julian Ray's late-night behavior since she had observed changes in their daughter Amaya. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers had begun to observe the stress in the Julian home during business meetings. At around 7:30 a.m. on April 12, 2015, the remains of Julian was found by the individual who, his neighbor Carson, a 52-year-old retired schoolteacher, discovered him. Alora, who lives next door to the Backers, contacted Carson in concern since she hadn't heard from. Since she had been seeing her sister out of town the night before, Julian Ray requested Carson to. Carson knocked on the door of the Backer house to see how her husband was doing, but he received no response. He chose to test the door after seeing that Julian Ray's car was in the driveway, and to his astonishment, it was opened. He sensed right once that something wasn't right because the home was abnormally. Carson silently yelled for Julian Ray, but he didn't hear him, so he went into the living room. He entered the kitchen and noticed broken glass on the floor and overturned chairs, which were evidence of a battle. Followed the path of mayhem to the master bedroom, where he was confronted by a gory scene when he opened the door. Saw Julian Ray, who had been bludgeoned to death with a bludgeon, lying on the ground in a pool of blood. The room was a disaster, with blood spattered over the walls and a hammer lying nearby coated in blood. When it became evident that Julian Ray had struggled for his life, Carson was appalled and instantly, with trembling hands, he backed out of the room, took out his cell phone, and phoned 911. The 911 operator tried to calm him down by asking him questions while his voice wavered as he narrated what he had discovered. To remain on the line until the cops showed up, as word of Julian Ray's passing traveled swiftly. Soon, police cars swarmed the neighborhood's Maple Street, and interested residents gathered outside. Discussing the startling incident in whispers to one another, local news organizations such as KSM&K dispatched reporters. To cover the story, Carson, who had been pals with Julian, became the most talked about news story in Ville by lunchtime. Ray had been in a state of shock for years since he never imagined seeing his buddy and neighbor dead in. Later, he informed reporters that Julian Ray was a wonderful man who didn't deserve to be treated so cruelly. Sadly, the finding of Julian's corpse signaled the start of a complicated and devastating inquiry that would reveal long-kept facts and provide startling findings. Concerning those closest to him, the police swiftly to the Julian residence following Carson's. Following a 911 call on April 12, 2015, the first responding cops cleared the area right away, making James Carter and investigator Sarah Mitchell Kinsey made sure that nobody went in or out of the residence shortly after. Detective Sarah Mitchell Kinsey, who came to head the investigation, was renowned for her sharp, a keen eye for detail. At 38, she had resolved several challenging cases with her companion detective. Together, they formed a solid bond. James Carter, 42, was known for his systematic approach. Crew noticed indications of a fight in the living room when the investigators searched the residence. The kitchen was even more chaotic, with plates all over the floor and chairs toppled and glass shattered. When they arrived to the master bedroom, they saw Julian lying on the floor in a grim scenario. With a hammer lying close by, he had been bludgeoned to death, leaving a pool of blood surrounding him. Blood was splashed on the walls and furniture, demonstrating the attack detective's brutality. Mitchell Kinsey ordered the hammer to be bagged as evidence after identifying it as the murder weapon. The forensic team and cops took several pictures of the chaotic and unsettling crime scene. They used gloves to carefully pick up objects while taking pictures and gathering samples, being cautious not to taint any evidence. The hammer, blood sample, and fingerprints were all gathered and forwarded to the. While the police worked at the local news stations, KFM, neighbors observed the lab for analysis outdoors. And K&A were present as well, covering the horrifying crime. Reporters chatted with neighbors who provided details about. Given Julian Ray's popularity and friendliness, the media attention increased the pressure to resolve the situation. Carson, who was still disturbed, was interrogated by detectives Mitchell Kinsey and Carter right away. From finding the corpse, he mentioned, to witnessing the debris inside the door that was open. The police were able to piece together the circumstances leading up to the murder, thanks to his thorough statement. The police had a lot of evidence at the end of the day, but they still had a lot of questions about could have carried out such a heinous deed. So why would someone wish to murder investigator Julian Ray? They were motivated to uncover the answers, even though they realized they had a challenging case ahead of them. Julian's wife, Alora, who was 34 years old, was the initial suspect in his murder. She was smart, elderly, and employed as an accountant for Razorback Accounting, a local company. Darlene, who is careful and diligent, had a difficult life. She became a mother at the age of 16 and worked as. Despite these obstacles, she established a prosperous career as a dancer to support herself and her daughter, Amaya. Profession, and had a reputation for having a strong will. Darlene had recently seen changes in. She became suspicious of Julian Ray's late-night work meetings with pals and her daughter, Amaya's actions. Several neighbors reported that Alora had been more anxious and tense in the weeks leading up to the murder. Some claimed to have overheard her and Julian Ray detective Sarah Mitchell arguing. On April 13, 2015, Kinsey and James Carter brought Alora in for interrogation. Darlene showed up. She said that she had been visiting her sister out of town, but she was obviously upset. Nancy and Little Rock supported her alibi with pictures and text conversations. However, the investigator remained skeptical when Darlene discussed her relationship with John throughout the interview. Ray said that they had been fighting more recently, mostly about his job and how much time away from home. She said that she loved her husband in spite of the fact that she had nothing to do with his death. When the investigators questioned Darlene about their issues, she revealed that she had departed for Little Rock on April 11 in the afternoon and remained with Nancy until April 12. When the investigators phoned Nancy, she validated this tale, but the tension was too great to ignore. When discussing Julian Ray and the changes she observed in Amaya at the police, Darlene's voice They looked over Darlin's possessions and vehicle for any proof, but they couldn't find anything that would directly connect her to the crime. But they did discover a journal where Alora detailed her annoyances and assumptions that these posts depicted a lady experiencing extreme stress and emotional upheaval. Detectives kept investigating Alora's history despite her alibi, making her a prime suspect. Interrogating friends, relatives, and co-workers in an effort to uncover a motivation where any hint might. As the inquiry went on, the demand to link Alora to the crime increased, but she stayed unwavering in her innocence. The inquiry into beloved Julian was extensive, but left many unanswered concerns. Remained unresolved, the investigators understood they needed to continue their investigation to find the truth behind. The second suspect in the vicious murder of Julian was his stepdaughter. Amaya. Amaya was 18 years old and a first-year student at the University of Arkansas. Psychology, her friends characterized her as having an outgoing and gregarious nature. Amaya, who was intelligent, driven, and constantly willing to learn new things, had a complex connection with. The examination found that her relationship with her stepfather, Julian Ray, had turned into a covert affair, which caused Amaya to feel terrible and torn, particularly as she witnessed the stress it placed on James Carter and her mother, kind detective Sarah Mitchell Kinsey. Called Amaya in for interrogation on April 14, 2015. She stated that she seemed anxious yet cooperative regarding the relationship with Julian Ray, stating that it began around half a year prior. She had been feeling lost and alone, and she said that Julian Ray had always supported her. During the interview, Amaya described how she had confided in a close friend that she didn't want to harm friend regarding the affair and her guilt sentiments. This friend, whose identity was kept a secret, attested to. Amaya told the officers about her final encounter with Julian Ray, which was she said that they had discussed the affair and its effects the night before he passed away. The police questioned Amaya about her movements on the night of the murder in order to get information about their family. Claimed to have studied for a midterm exam at a friend's house, her pal attested to this. Alibi claiming Amaya had remained there till the wee hours of April 12, in spite of. The investigators' suspicions about Amaya's inner struggle were based on the alibi. Police also looked through Amaya's possessions and dorm room for any proof, but they couldn't find anything. Finding several letters and messages between her and the murderer, but without explicitly connecting her to it, and Julian Ray. These messages demonstrated the depth of their bond and their emotional challenges. Despite her alibi and the absence of concrete proof, Amaya continued to be a top suspect because the police kept interviewing her acquaintances in response to the affair and the emotional strain it caused. As peers looking for any discrepancies or fresh clues, Amaya's burden increased despite the ongoing inquiry, she insisted on her innocence and conveyed her sincere apologies for the affair. Even though Amaya's research was exhaustive, the investigator had a lot of unanswered questions. Realized that further investigation was necessary to uncover the facts about the ruthless April murder of Julian. 17/2015, 5 days following the murder of Julian, the authorities got a big break in the. However, on a cold, cloudy morning, a jogger found an object in the park close to. He was intrigued when he saw a plastic bag half buried beneath some leaves beside a seat in Beaver Lake. He phoned the police right away after opening it and seeing a blood-stained shirt and gloves. And patrol officers Tom Martinez and Karen Lewis reached the scene in a matter of minutes, securing the location and promptly summoned investigators James Carter and Sarah Mitchell Kinsey. The investigators were careful as they evaluated the situation and packed the materials for forensic examination. However, they brought the things in the hopes that this fresh evidence might lead to a breakthrough in the investigation. Forensic experts at the Fayetteville Police Department's forensic lab discovered that the blood on the gloves had fingerprints that weren't Julian Ray's, and the shirt matched his DNA. The investigators reviewed their list after this fresh evidence changed the investigation's emphasis of suspects and re-examined their defenses. They also looked over the park's camera video. In surrounding places, this thorough analysis led them to the unexpected discovery of a figure that matched Amaya. Late on the evening of the murder, detectives saw Amaya approaching the park. Amaya was called in for a second round of interrogation by Mitchell, Kinsey, and Carter, and this time she stated, looking noticeably more anxious, that she had gone to the park to decompress and was unaware of. The investigators asked her for further information about the bleeding objects, but Amaya adhered to her tale regardless. After continuing their investigation, the forensic team discovered yet another important piece of evidence. The case was compounded by the discovery of hair strands on the gloves that matched Darlene Julian's DNA. Further, and said that both mother and daughter may have been involved on April 18, 2015. The detectives summoned Alora back for interrogation. She appeared composed yet worried upon seeing them. Alora, according to new evidence, acknowledged knowing about the gloves, but maintained she had nothing to do with them. She claimed to have worn the gloves while gardening, but she was unable to explain how they ended up close to Beaver Lake. The police were even more committed to cracking the case they knew about. They needed to carefully put the last piece of the puzzle together, but they were almost there. An important turning point in the inquiry was the finding of the new evidence, which provided vital clues in stepping up the hunt for the killer of Julian Rader, a true crime case solvers. Please like and subscribe to our channel if you're interested in more real-life murder mysteries. If you have any opinions on this case or a story of your own that you would want us to look into, please let us know. Stay careful. True crime case solvers identify the third suspect in Julian's murder. Diddy Julian, his ex-wife, was renowned for being irritable and violent when she was 4 or 6 years old. She and Julian Ray had a tense relationship, and she had never supported his union with Alora. Diddy was a manager at a nearby supermarket in Ville and a detective for Harris Food Stores. On April 19, 2015, Sarah Mitchell Kinsey and James Carter made the decision to interrogate Diddy. Diddy had a reputation for being argumentative and confrontational when she arrived at the police station. Diddy acknowledged expressing her views and not keeping her ideas to herself during the interrogation. Claims she had a difficult connection with Julian Ray and that their marriage was turbulent and, during heated fights, Diddy called Alora a home wrecker and blamed her, expressing her contempt for ending her marriage, but Diddy strongly denied having anything to do with Julian. Detectives investigating Ray's murder asked Diddy where she was on the evening of April 11, 2015. Diddy said she was drinking wine and watched TV at home. She said she had seen an episode. There were no witnesses to support her alibi of dancing with the stars and retiring to bed early, which caused the investigator to get suspicious, so the cops looked for any proof connecting Diddy to. Several objects of interest were discovered in relation to the murder, including a pair of gardening gloves that resembled the ones discovered in the park, but forensic examination revealed that these gloves had no blood nor DNA. Daddy's potential was further investigated by the police despite her alibi and the absence of concrete proof. Reason: they found that Diddy had just become aware of Julian Ray's liaison with Amaya. This, as friends and co-workers informed the police, added another level of stress and maybe rage. Diddy, who called Julian Ray a disgrace, had been very agitated and outspoken about the situation. After telling anybody who would listen how angry she was, the investigators also spoke with Diddy's neighbors who claimed to have heard boisterous disputes emanating from her home in the days preceding. Mrs. Carson, a neighbor, claimed to have overheard Diddy shouting about lying and treachery during the murder. Even though Diddy was still the suspect, the police had trouble getting enough evidence to accuse her of being hostile when being questioned, but she insisted on her innocence. Detectives were aware that additional hard proof was required to connect her to the crime they were looking into. As the investigators put in endless effort, Diddy Julian introduced yet another level of complication to the investigation. The breakthrough was used to reconstruct the circumstances that led to Julian Ray's murder on April 21, 2015. After days of investigation, detectives finally made a breakthrough in Julian's murder case. James Carter and Sarah Mitchell Kinsey discovered a security camera, which was an essential piece of evidence. Had recorded Darlene Maxter traveling late toward Beaver Lake from a local gas station. This substantial bleeding on the night of the murder ran counter to Darlan's alibi detectives. After closely examining the video, Mitchell, Kinsey, and Carter saw that Darlan's vehicle was a blue Honda. The car drove by the petrol station at around 11:30 p.m. This put her close to the crime site on April 11. With this fresh evidence, the investigators were certain they had located Julian at the pivotal moment. When the police arrived at Darlan Julian's office early on April 22, 2015, they found Ray's murderer. Back then, it was a bright day, and local news outlets QA and KFSM were all ready. Alora was at her office when the police arrived, providing coverage of the most recent developments in the case. She was taken aback but maintained her composure when they told her that she had been arrested for her murder. Alora said she was innocent while being led out in handcuffs, but the evidence against. She was taking control, and Julian Ray and Amaya's romance had sent Alora into a rage. The police think that she was furious because she felt deceived by both her husband and her daughter. Alora contacted Julian Ray the night of the murder. The altercation turned violent and Alora fatally struck him many times with a hammer before being arrested, shocking the friends in the community were shocked to learn that the clever, diligent lady they knew was able to carry out such a severe deed. Articles about it appeared in the Fayetteville Observer. Reactions to local news stations' coverage on Julian Ray's arrest were not entirely uniform. While some were appalled that the killer had been apprehended, others were heartbroken by the betrayal. Amaya was especially devastated since she had lost her mother and stepfather. The family suffered a great deal of emotional distress in a few days after their beloved was brought to the police. She persisted in denying her participation in the station, but the detectives were certain of their conclusions from the forensic evidence. The CCTV film and Alora's contradictory statements clearly demonstrated her culpability, leaving the Phil community to deal with. Deep family secrets were revealed by the terrible circumstances surrounding Julian's death, leaving a lasting impact on people who knew him. Although the police had solved the case, it would take a lot of time to heal the emotional wounds. Time to recover. Alora Julian's trial for killing her husband Julian started on. Reporters crowded the courtroom at the Washington County Courthouse in Phil on July 15, 2015. From neighborhood people who were worried, as well as local news outlets including KSN and KSS. Robert Stevens, the district attorney in charge of the prosecution, is 45 years old and known for being. In the courtroom, he was aggressive and persistent in his argument that Alora's motivation for the murder was her. The revelation of Julian Ray and Amaya Stevens' romance depicted a lady who was forced. He showed the surveillance film of Darlan's treachery and emotional agony, which marked a breaking point. The contradicting claims and the forensic evidence from the crime site in the automobile at Beaver Lake. She had provided to the police on the opposing side, and lawyer Michelle Williams lead the defense. The 39-year-old, who is renowned for her cool head and keen legal sense, maintained that Alora was innocent. Given since there was circumstantial evidence, Williams proposed that another person may have committed the murder, maybe out of resentment or envy. He doubted the validity of the surveillance camera and noted that throughout the whole incident, no witnesses had seen Alora conduct the act. The trial was watched with a mixture of rage by Julian Ray's family, who were seated in the front row. In sorrow, Amaya, in particular, battled the emotional burden of losing the trial. Her stepfather, and was now in danger of losing her mother due to a lengthy prison term. The jury debated for 3 days following 2 weeks of testimony before returning a decision on August 3. The courtroom was heated when the jury found Darlan Julian guilty of first-degree murder in 2015. While Julian Ray's family sobbed and embraced as the decision was delivered, Alora displayed little emotion. The decision was promptly broadcast by the local press, and the story received a lot of coverage in. Judge Lisa Carson of the Fayetteville Observer gave Alora a life sentence without the possibility of parole. She declared that Alora's guilt was amply demonstrated by the evidence, and that the offense was, due to severe personal betrayal and rage. The court showed compassion for Julian Ray's family. They hoped that the sentencing would provide them with some closure on the response to the decision. was conflicting. Some community members thought justice had been done, while others thought the penalty was overly severe in light of Darlin's challenging history and the psychological strain she endured at Julian's hands. However, Ray's family was relieved that the situation was resolved and that the individual responsibility for his demise and the trial and punishment signaled the conclusion of a sad chapter that the murder and its aftermath had left behind for the Julian family and the town of Phil. Severe emotional wounds, but the decision offered a feeling of fairness and a move in the right direction following. Light gradually started to return to normal for those engaged in Alora Julian's trial and punishment. Alora, the victim of Julian Rayer's sad murder case, is currently incarcerated in the Arkansas Department of Correction. Her life became a harsh routine, and she was only permitted to have relatives and friends visit her sometimes. With stringent guidelines controlling her day-to-day actions, the press attention around it progressively diminished, to be replaced by fresh tales and happenings in Phil, such as the yearly Bikes Blues. At the barbecue motorbike event, 19-year-old Amaya went back to school at the University of Arkansas. She battled sadness and shame in psychology for her part in the affair that finally resulted in. Amaya sought counseling to help her deal with the emotional fallout following the death of her stepfather. She made a concerted effort to mend her family's connection. She also kept her distance from the media, concentrating on her education and volunteering at nearby animal shelters while working as a detective. Sarah Mitchell Kenzie was honored for her contribution to the resolution of the well-known case. She kept on her job at the Phil Police Department, where she mentored younger officers and investigated other crimes. Detective James Carter was assigned to the Narcotics Task Force in Northwest Arkansas, where he used his investigative abilities to fight drug-related crimes in the neighborhood of Phil. Julian Ray's murder had a lasting impression on neighbors and friends. As a gregarious and prosperous real estate broker who enjoyed sailing on Beaver Lake, the local civic association erected a plaque at the Fayetteville Town Center and conducted a memorial service in his honor. To honor Julian Ray's life and his services to the community, particularly his first, Diddy's wife found comfort and support in each other's presence as she concentrated on her work at Hearts.